there will be a grand jury that she will turn this case over to once they have collected all the information.
The investigation into the death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells is picking up speed as it's now being reported this case may be headed to a grand jury, just as newly released GPS data and dispatch audio are raising new questions about what happened in Nolan's final hours. We're going to break it all down and what this could mean right now.
Nolan Wells was 18. He should have been getting ready for his first college football season right now. Instead, his name is at the center of a Mississippi Gulf Coast mystery that just took a serious legal turn. And there's one detail in this update most coverage is glossing over: the 90 minutes nobody has explained. Welcome back to the Crime and Consequences. If you're new here, we cover the cases where the official story and the timeline don't quite line up. Not with wild theories, but with the facts as they're actually coming out. And this week, there's a lot of them. Here's where things stand. Nolan disappeared during a 4th of July weekend boating trip out to Horn Island, off the Mississippi coast. His body was recovered 2 days later, not far from where he was last seen. For weeks, the working narrative from local authorities was straightforward, no signs of foul play. But this week, that narrative shifted in a way that's hard to ignore. The Wells family and their legal team met directly with the district attorney.
Now we're going to get into it all. I actually want to start with what we learned at this press conference about this grand jury. So Ben Crump announced that the family met with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McGrath, and arguably the biggest takeaway from that meeting came directly from Crump.
She shared with the family that there will be a grand jury that she will turn this case over to once they have collected all the information and finished their investigation. We also agreed that we will have a mutual inspection of the cell phone with our experts and their experts. Attorney Eric Hertz is helping lead the investigation team with former law enforcement experts who are going to help us with the cell phone download. So everybody will be able to see at the same time what the cell phone has.
And came away from that meeting with confirmation that this case is now expected to be handed to a grand jury once the investigation wraps.
Okay, so we have to talk about a huge new phase that we're now entering in the investigation into the death of Nolan Wells. If you recall, 18-year-old college football player disappeared while out boating with friends on the July 4th weekend. They were going to Horn Island. This is off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. His body was found nearby 2 days after he vanished. Now, the family has met with the district attorney. And this investigation, it is now being reported, may be headed to a grand jury. If that is true, we are one step closer to possibly finding out who, if anyone, is responsible for Nolan's death, or whether anyone committed any crimes in connection with this investigation.
Let's be precise about what that does and doesn't mean, because this is where a lot of true crime coverage gets sloppy.
So to help make sense of everything that we've been talking about, I want to bring in Tyler Bailey, criminal defense attorney, civil rights attorney. So good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. I think this is the first you and I have talked about this case. And I want to start with arguably the biggest legal update, the grand jury. This idea that, according to Ben Crump, right, that this may go to a grand jury once the investigation by the sheriff's office is complete. What do you think that would look like? I mean, what could the grand jury potentially be looking at here? What kind of evidence, what potential charges?
Well, ideally, they should look at all relevant evidence here that could lead them to make a conclusion whether they believe there's enough probable cause for criminal charges or not, and not be a grand jury that's spoon-fed particular information.
LA grand jury doesn't mean anyone is being charged. It means a prosecutor believes there's enough here to let a group of citizens decide whether charges should follow. That's it. But if you're the family of an 18-year-old who went out on a boat and never came home, and the tone goes from no foul play suspected to this is headed to a grand jury, you don't need a law degree to feel like something changed.
And to be clear, I'm not saying that's the case, but when you hear the reports that this may be going to a grand jury, that's what you have to be thinking, right? Because when you think of a grand jury and potential crimes, it could mean a whole host of things. But let's not forget, there is still a lot of mystery that needs to be solved here. Key pieces of the timeline seem to be still being debated. Some of the most important evidence hasn't been fully analyzed yet. And we also, and maybe most importantly, we still do not know Nolan's official cause of death. Now, I got to be clear about something. This grand jury doesn't mean that they're charging someone, but it does seem to mean that the DA could present the evidence to a group that will decide whether charges should be brought. And it also becomes a question whether the DA would actually move forward with that.
And if you've been tracking this case with us, you are probably already asking the same questions investigators are only now catching up to.
We also talked about trying to make sure we dot every I and cross every T. I know that we're getting about 50 calls a day to 100 calls a day from people who were there on Horn Island, people who are familiar with individuals that were there on Horn Island. And so we continue to be steadfast in trying to get to the truth of why Nolan Wells is dead.
So what actually changed? Two things, and they both matter. The first is Nolan's phone. It's going to undergo what's being called a mutual inspection, meaning investigators for the state and independent experts working for the family will examine the device's data at the same time, side by side.
And yes, we're learning some things. But here is another big update that we got to talk about. We have learned from Ben Crump, again, the family's attorney, that Nolan's phone will undergo a, quote, mutual inspection, meaning both the state investigators and the family's own experts are going to analyze the phone. So that could potentially be a game changer here. It does raise questions about how this would work. It does raise questions about how the evidence is being processed. Does it contaminate the evidence in any way? How do you have this dual investigation? And I mean, the family reportedly believes that data may have been deleted from that phone. So that raises an interesting question, as well as why Nolan didn't have his phone.
If that sounds unusual to you, it should. Digital evidence in a case like this typically stays in the sole custody of law enforcement. A joint extraction like this one signals something about trust, or the lack of it, between a grieving family and the people running the official investigation.
So let me go on to this other major development from this week's press conference. The family is now going to be allowed to inspect Nolan's phone alongside investigators. There's going to be this mutual inspection where both sides will see the contents at the same time. Tyler, is that unusual? Let's first start there.
That's highly unusual. It's highly unusual that a victim's family, along with their attorney, would be allowed to participate with law enforcement in the inspection of a cell phone data that's really the crux, one of the crucial pieces of evidence with this case. I don't think that would have happened without a lot of the chatter going on around the country about how this investigation has transpired, and it shows there's some distrust between the family and law enforcement here. And there, from my understanding, there has been not the best communication with the DA and law enforcement and the family. So the concession to allowing a joint inspection, I think, is an attempt from the government or the state here to try to regain some of that trust with the victim's family.
And I thought it was also unusual, if the reporting is true and if this is accurate, that the family has been in possession of this phone and hasn't or turned it over to law enforcement yet. I mean, maybe that's not true, but this is what the reporting seems to suggest. I would again imagine that's a little unusual.
And there's a wrinkle underneath it. The family reportedly believes data may have been deleted from that phone before it ever reached anyone's hands. If that's confirmed, that's not a footnote. That's a 5-alarm fact. The second thing is the timeline itself, and this is the part I want you to really sit with. New audio has surfaced of what sounds like a distress call from the boat Nolan was on.
This is a big update. New details are emerging about the timeline surrounding Nolan's death. What do I mean? NBC News has obtained audio of what seems to be Nolan's friends calling for help when that boat that he was in trouble. Listen to this.
We're sinking. Can y'all please come?
And is everybody on board in good health otherwise?
Yeah, everybody's on board.
So from that little bit and reporting by outlets like NBC News and the New York Post, it seems that boat likely had 7 people on board. The boat was having trouble at around 4 p.m. The boat operator reportedly said, "Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn and our bilge pump stopped working. I want to get this boat unsank and towed back." That boat was reportedly towed for 3 miles. It picked up speed less than an hour.
Someone radios in that the boat is taking on water. A voice on the other end asks if everyone aboard is okay. The answer comes back, everyone's fine. Everyone's on board. Simple enough. Except Nolan didn't come home on that boat. So somewhere between that call and the moment the boat eventually left the island, he was no longer with the group.
An hour later, we're actually going to talk about that a little bit more. And look, we also know from the Jackson County Sheriff, again, John Ledbetter, that Nolan did not come back on that boat. We don't know for certain if Nolan was on that boat during the call or if he was already off the boat at that point. But look, as far as we can tell, what we seem to know is that at some point between that call and 4:31 p.m., when the boat left, it seems Nolan was no longer.
Ask yourself, how does "everyone's on board" turn into one person never made it back, and nobody's been asked to explain it under oath? If you're keeping score, that's the first open loop. Here's the second, and it's the one that should really stop you. Newly obtained GPS records tracking the boat's movement that day lay out a timeline down to the minute.
More witnesses, eyewitnesses to what they saw about the boat or who was involved. And by the way, let me go to this part. So CBS News obtained GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and it tracks the boat's movement. So I want to walk through that timeline. This is information they say they obtained via records request. So it appears to suggest that this boat, this vessel, left the dock at approximately 9:56 that morning, arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. According to GPS data, the boat then reportedly left Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon, returned to its original departure dock, then traveled into Fort Bayou at around 5:52 before returning to the dock at 6:06. Later that evening, the boat went into the Fort Bayou boat launch at 7:19, traveled overland, which would suggest that it was possibly towed by a vehicle to the owner's residence. And to just kind of put this into perspective, I believe Ben Crump has claimed that Nolan was last seen on the island at 3 p.m.
The boat left the dock that morning, reached Horn Island a little over an hour later, and, according to the family's legal team, Nolan was last seen alive on that island at around 3 in the afternoon. But the GPS data shows the boat didn't actually leave Horn Island until 4:30. That's an hour and a half. An hour and a half between the last confirmed sighting of Nolan and the boat pulling away without him. What happened in that window is, right now, entirely unaccounted for.
That if he was last seen on the island at 3 p.m. and they apparently, not only did they leave there, go to another area, then go to dock and get towed, there's a lot that could have transpired between that time, especially putting that in conjunction with the text messages and Snapchat history that was allegedly deleted from his phone or missing from his phone. So there's a lot of time for people to get their stories straight, to talk to maybe counsel or others about what needs to be the narrative when they arrive. Now, I'm speculating to a lot of this because we don't know. There has been no interrogation of these individuals. There's been no official statements that have been issued, but it's clear that there's been a significant period of time between the boat leaving, the last time Nolan was seen, and this boat getting back to its original owner.
And look, it confirms, or it seems to confirm, right, this boat left 4:31. We still have conflicting accounts about whether Nolan chose to stay behind or he was left behind.
And if you noticed that gap before the attorneys started talking about it publicly, you were paying closer attention than most of the reporting so far. It gets more complicated. After leaving the island, the boat didn't head straight home. GPS shows stops, a detour into another waterway, a return to the dock hours later, and then, later that same night, the boat being moved again, this time apparently overland, seemingly towed by a vehicle back to its owner's property. None of that is illegal on its own. People take boats out of the water all the time, but stacked next to a missing 90 minutes and a phone with reportedly deleted data. It's the kind of detail that makes an already uneasy timeline feel even less settled. To be fair, we should say plainly nobody has been named a suspect. Nobody has been charged with anything. the boat's owner, his mother, and another individual who was reportedly with Nolan that day have all been cooperating with investigators, which their attorneys would rightly point out counts for something.
And this deep GPS data is going to be an important role, it seems. I will say this, this report, this MSDMR report, also indicates that the boat's owner, his mother, and one other individual who was reportedly with Nolan on the day of this incident have cooperated with the investigation. What does that mean to you that they have cooperated?
It means that they probably have been accessible to law enforcement, that they at least have their contact information, they're being responsive to law enforcement. The question regarding cooperating is to what extent. Now, will they testify between a grand jury? Before a grand jury, or will they have to plead the fifth before a grand jury? Just because they are cooperating does not mean they're all being completely forthcoming. We don't know to what extent their role is, what information that they have. They could be cooperating through counsel. Which is nothing wrong with cooperating through counsel. But I think it at least shows that they aren't stonewalling the police and they're being assessed.
Cooperation isn't guilt, and speculation isn't evidence. We're not accusing anyone of anything here. We're laying out what's publicly known, and where the holes still are. There's also the human side of this that's easy to lose under all the procedural detail. Nolan was someone's son, a teammate, a kid who, by every account from people who actually knew him, was about as inseparable from his phone as any 18-year-old you've ever met. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should, because part of what's driving scrutiny here is a simple, almost mundane question. Would he really have left it behind on his own?
We cover those cases all the time. I do think the location of the phone is another key component about this, right? So the family has said that, first of all, it was unusual that Nolan would go off on his own, but also the idea that he would leave his phone behind. You know, what teenager puts their phone down? But then you have this friend of Nolan's who told ABC News that, look, it's normal to leave phones on the boat. You're protecting them from the salt water. He said all their friends were out there, that they were not communicating with anyone else. Who else would they talk to? And he said that when Nolan got in the boat, he put his phone on the boat's dash, along with probably 15 other phones. How do you see it?
That's not usual. I mean, even taking, for what we've heard, that there was a young lady that he met named Katie and that he was interested in talking to her, you would think that he would want to be able to text her later on or get in contact with her later. I don't know many 18-year-olds who aren't glued to the hip to their phone. And even if they put their phone somewhere, if they're going to stay behind, they would definitely grab their phone. And so I think that seems suspicious, if anything. I hear the friend's position on it, but it draws many people some ire and gets to the same conclusion of that doesn't sound like the 18-year-olds and 23-year-olds that we know. They like to have their phones on them and keep them close by.
Friends say it's common to leave phones on a boat dashboard to protect them from saltwater. Maybe that's exactly what happened. Or maybe it's one more thread in a timeline that keeps not quite adding up. The family, meanwhile, is doing two things no parent should have to do at once: pushing for an independent investigation, including their own separate autopsy.
One more point I want to ask you about the autopsies, right? So we have two things going on here. We're waiting for the results of both, right? We're waiting for the state autopsy. It seems that they're waiting toxicology reports. But then the family is, by all accounts, trying to do this independent autopsy out in Washington, D.C. What should we be thinking about these potential dual examinations of Nolan?
If there's a stark difference between the examinations, whether the state's examination leads to simply a drowning with no evidence of foul play or any strangulation or struggle versus a independent investigation from the family that shows otherwise, I think that makes it draws some suspicion.
While also planning their son's funeral, Nolan's mother has spoken about the outpouring of support from the community, teachers, and classmates reaching out.
Thank you so much. Just the outpouring of love, support. We've had some local officials. Mayor Casey Vaughn from Gaucher has reached out to us. Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you. He has, it's almost been every day. He's been texting to check on us. Also, Jeffrey Hullum, thank you so much. He's been texting pretty much every day, receiving a lot of stories from Nolan's teachers, which just warms my heart, his classmates, teammates.
It's a reminder, underneath all the legal maneuvering, of what and who this is actually about. So where does it go from here? If the grand jury is impaneled, the process is private by design. No cameras, no public testimony, not even the family's own attorney in the room. If it declines to indict, there will be questions about whether it was given the full picture. If it does move forward, it will validate a lot of the concerns people have had since the earliest "no foul play" statements. Either way, the toxicology and autopsy results still haven't been released, and until they are, we genuinely don't know how Nolan died.
We don't know when the results of the family's independent autopsy is going to be released. Last week, we were hoping to have that update for you on July 10th when the family's attorney, Ben Crump, said he'd initially expected to have the preliminary findings, but for now, we're still in the dark on them. Crump has said that flight cancellations are causing transport issues in getting Nolan's body to D.C. for that examination. And at the same time, there is no autopsy results that have been released as part of the official state investigation either. At last check, the toxicology reports are still pending. To be clear, by the way, last week, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter indicated there is no reason to suspect foul play. We have no reason to believe that conclusion or belief has changed, but as we know, investigations do develop, they evolve.
Only that the hours before it happened are full of gaps nobody in an official capacity has explained yet. We'll be tracking every one of those threads as they develop, and there's more in the digital evidence itself we're still digging into for next time that could reshape this timeline again. If you've been following this case, tell us in the comments, what part of that 90-minute gap do you think investigators need to answer first? Thanks for watching The Crime and Consequences. Subscribe so you don't miss the next update, and we'll see you then.